Hey guys, and welcome to the Aquarium Life. Today, we're going to be talking about what tank is the best tank for beginners. Should you get a big tank, like a 30 or 40 gallon, or maybe a smaller tank, like a 5 to 10 gallon, or even a medium-sized tank, a 15 to 20 gallon. What works best if you're just starting? Well, let us get started on finding out. The first type of tank on this list are small tanks, like 2.5, 3.5, 5, and 10. Most people think that when it comes to it, a small tank is perfect for a beginner, as it's easier to keep in every way. But that's not fully true. A small tank is great in the way for a beginner to learn and find out how to maintain a tank and keep it clean and keep all levels steady in it. But at the same time, there's some major cons. For example, disease spreads a lot faster. When it comes, disease can be a big problem in your tank if one of your fish gets one. For example, if it's in the middle of the night, you hadn't noticed right before you went to bed because you were just tired, and you didn't notice that one of your fish had a disease. Now, during that entire night, if that fish doesn't go to sleep right when you do, it's going to be swimming around. And in a smaller tank, that's going to be a problem, because since there's no one there to get it out of there and quarantine it, it's going to be going around all through the night, going by other fish, spreading the disease while you're asleep. And by morning, the chances are it ain't going to be just one fish infected now. And now that it's infected more, those fish can infect more. And by the time you notice, you might even have an entire infected tank. Another huge issue with this is that you can't keep as many fish to begin, or even some fish in some cases. For example, if you decide to get a 2.5 or 3.5 gallon to start, you can't really keep that many like guppies or platies, mollies, and you can't even start keeping fish like goldfish. The best you're keeping is maybe 2 guppies, a betta, a few platies, 1 or 2 mollies. You're not going to be keeping that much in that kind of tank, and you won't be able to get much else. Yeah, I know beginners shouldn't get too many fish, because if you're a beginner, it's going to be annoying to begin with to just get like 2 fish. It's not easy. But when it comes to it, you're going to want a few extra fish sometimes. And that's why maybe we should be going for something a little bigger than a small tank. Alright. That's all I gotta say about the small tanks. That's weighing all the pros and cons. So let's move on to the next one. The next type of tank on this list are the medium-sized tanks. Medium-sized tanks are the kind of tanks that are 15 gallons, 17.5 gallons, and 20 gallons. They're right in the mid-range, like their name implies. One pro about these that I actually forgot to mention with the smaller tanks are that the smaller tanks and the medium-sized tanks are cheaper than the larger tanks. Now, it's going to be a bit pricier than a smaller tank, which is a con, but it's still cheaper than a larger tank. Another problem is they're going to still not be able to have as many fish as the larger tanks. In 2 ways. A 20 gallon is a great tank for so many different kinds of fish. Even a 17.5. 15 is still included in that range. It's not as good as maybe a 20 gallon, which is still in the mid-sized range, but another great tank. All 3 of them actually can be used and kept so many different kinds of fish. But the thing is, it's still not as many as maybe a 30 or 40 gallon can keep, which is a small con. It's not that bad. But there's also so many pros to having a 20 gallon. It's way easier to maintain than a 30 gallon or 40 gallon. Way easier. A 15 gallon, even easier to maintain. A 17.5 gallon is in the middle of those two. It's still very easy to maintain compared to the larger tanks, of course. But a con being they're harder to maintain than the smaller tanks. Now, a big pro though is that disease will barely spread in these kind of tanks. It's still not going to spread as slow as in a big large tank, but even especially if you have smaller fish in that large tank, there's not that many of them. But it's still really good for stopping disease spread. You're not going to have much at all. If one fish gets a disease and you don't notice it right before you go to bed and leave them overnight, and then notice it in the morning, your fish is probably only going to have infected 1 or 2 fish at most. Sometimes not even any. It's perfect for that kind of thing. So there's actually a lot of pros to having a medium-sized tank, but there's also still a few simple cons. Well, that's really all I have to say about the medium-sized. Let's move on to our final, the large tanks. The final tank on this list are the large tanks. The 30, 40 gallon, or even 50 gallon. The ones that you're gonna get for the bigger fish. Now, the best thing about these large tanks, the overall best thing, is that you can get almost any type of fish that's not required for giant tanks. There's usually a big difference, so you'll either have 30, 40, 50 gallon in that range, or it'll go all the way up to 75 and 125 and 350, which aren't even on this list for a reason. No beginner's going to be getting them. But these tanks can hold almost any beginner fish. There's not really an issue with them, and it'll work very easily. There's also some pretty big cons though. It's going to require a lot more work from you, and it matters how much work of that work you're actually willing to put in. For example, sometimes people think they can handle the work of a fish tank. It sounds pretty challenging, but you think you got it down. But then you realize it's a lot more than it seems. This is the kind of tank that's going to be a lot more than it seems. The large tank range, not going to be as easy to take care of. Also, it's going to cost you a lot more money than the smaller tanks. You're going to need a bigger filter, a bigger heater, an even bigger air pump, maybe even a bigger vacuum, more decorations, and a lot of gravel to cover the bottom. Also, brings up a pretty big electrical bill. And if you're an adult or you're a child, that's gonna get annoying for either you or your parents. So, there's also another pro though of a large tank. That's disease barely ever spreads. Unless you have big fish, there's barely gonna be any disease. It's never gonna be there for any other fish except maybe 1 or 2. That's all the fish that are gonna have a disease in a tank. You'll never have any more, any less, almost always guaranteed. There's a decent amount of pros, as you've just heard, for a large tank, but there's also a lot of cons. So, let's compare them all. Alright guys, I put all the pros and cons on a chart, so now we'll be able to exactly understand all of the benefits and losses about having certain tank sizes. Now, please note that in medium, the mini cons that were on the list are labeled as mini, and they'll be only added as half a con. So when you look at it overall, it looks like equal to equal amount of pros, the same amount of cons. But then you got to look at and add up medium's mini cons to get just one con. So in medium, it's a 3-2. Now, that may seem like medium automatically wins, but we got to make sure that we've looked at the others first. For example, in the small tank, being able to help beginners learn how to take care of a fish tank is a huge pro. So you gotta really take that into consideration. So I'm gonna give that an extra half a point. Now we're at 2.5 to 2, and then you got middle being 3 to 2. Now let's look at the large tank. A major pro is that you can get a lot of different type of fish. For example, you could now get certain algae eaters that can be gotten in a larger tank that you can't get in a smaller tank, and you can get more fish in general. Alright, so now you look at all of those, and with that being a mega con, it's not a mega con, sorry guys, mega pro. It means that now 2.5 to 2. Now, once you add and compare all of those together, you get your answer to which tank size is perfect for beginners. And that is medium tanks!